Hello, DS3000. Today we're going to be talking about the NBA draft, more specifically how accurate the NBA draft is at predicting the success of its players. We attempted to address this problem through use of machine learning techniques.
Every year since the NBA began, there has been an NBA draft prior to the season. Since 1988, that draft has been 2 rounds long, and teams will take turns picking a player to add to their roster.
So our problem. Throughout NBA history, there have been notable examples of busts, players who were drafted very high but they never lived up to the hype, and there's also a lot of steals that have happened, which is when players were drafted low and they exceeded their expected performance for their draft slot. For example, Anthony Bennett on the left, who was drafted number 1 overall in 2013 but was out of the league a few years later, and Draymond Green, who was drafted 35th overall in 2012 and ended up leading the Warriors to multiple championships.
Busts and steals occur fairly frequently in any given NBA draft. For our project, we decided to try to figure out how much in aggregate these inaccurate picks were occurring. The goal of our project was to determine how often players performed statistically in line with where they were drafted.
We felt that it was important to examine this problem since our model could be used by a general manager or other sort of front office executives of an NBA team to determine exactly how valuable their specific draft pick they held at this moment or any future draft pick they might get would be. This could also help any particular organization try to figure out whether they were consistently underperforming in the NBA draft, which would lead to them reevaluating how they prepared for the draft. And if the league in general is constantly drafting players out of order, then it's clear that the general scouting techniques used across the NBA are flawed.
Our method. We first scraped the career stat lines of every NBA player drafted from 1989 to 2015. We chose to avoid more recent drafts because those players have not fully developed yet, and we avoided earlier drafts because those drafts were more than 2 rounds long. After data collection, we thoroughly explored the data set to gain an understanding of average stat lines for different draft buckets, and we then trained a support vector machine classifier to sensibly place players into draft buckets according to their stats, and check the classified buckets and the actual buckets.
We separated the NBA draft into 6 buckets, with each bucket representing a region of the draft. This bucket approach allowed our model much more breathing room to make classifications with, since our old model was trying to match every single pick 1 through 60 instead of into groups of 6, which was making it a lot harder to get results that made sense.
We found that our model correctly classified the players into the same bucket that they were actually drafted in 78% of the time, which implies that about 78% of all NBA draft picks performed statistically in line with the draft region where they were actually selected.
Since our model was designed to be sensible, for example, it did not predict a draft bust to be picked highly or a draft steal to be picked late. Our model's accuracy rate suggests that NBA executives do not always draft accurately and that players' career performance can be hard to predict.
What does this mean for the NBA? An accuracy rate of 78% suggests that while they're doing an okay job, improving that rate could have major monetary ramifications for any NBA organization that's consistently making bad picks. Beyond that, since it's a sport league and there's competitive advantage to be had by getting that accuracy rate up.
So since we set out to determine exactly how accurate the NBA draft was, and we found that our model was accurate about 78% of the time, we found that the NBA was likely accurate about 78% of the time they made a pick in the draft. There's a lot of room for further research into this concept, whether that's examining how each team individually is doing the draft, examining specific buckets, or trying to determine which positions in the NBA are typically drafted most accurately or inaccurately.
Thank you.